Good evening, friends. So I've had a pretty good day. Finished work, had a massive plate full of rice, and I just had coffee with an old friend just outside the centre of town. And I found myself walking along this street in Narodny, because I'm headed to the pub, of course. And so I figured this would be a good place to start. Now, most of the time, as you know, it's mostly buildings that I talk about and the history thereof. In this case, it's this street, because this was the flashpoint for the Velvet Revolution, which was the non-violent transition of power between the Soviet Union back to the people of Czechoslovakia between the 17th of November and the 28th of November 1989. Now, for context, most people know about the Soviet occupation, but just for additional information, that was from 1968 until 1989. But even before that, essentially, Czechoslovakia had been run by a one-party system, the Communist Party, for 41 years, because from 48 until 68, the Communist Party in Czechoslovakia ran it as a one-party system and really was just de facto a satellite of the Soviet sphere, even before their full invasion. Anyway, so the 17th of November is International Students' Day. The 17th of November 1989 was the 50th anniversary of a Nazi crackdown in 1939 on the same date at the universities, where 1,200 students were arrested and 9 were killed. So, on the 16th of November, now it has to be said that Slovakia is often seen, and not without some justification, as Czech Republic's little brother. But it must be said that some key figures and key events in the Velvet Revolution were Slovak, including the first demonstration, which was held on the eve of International Students' Day on the 16th of November. Non-violent, but it was the first thing in the chronology, really. The next day, in Prague, the Socialist Youth Union, which was technically an arm of the Communist Party, although it contained many members who held anti-Communist Party ideas. They started demonstrating and commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Nazi raid of Jan Opital, who was one of the student martyrs at that time. And it gained momentum. And on this street, Narodny, 15,000 people marched all the way from Vyšehrad, which is a long way in that direction, picking up people as they went, and headed along here. They visited a grave of a man in Vyšehrad, and also the death places of 2 other people. And they marched down this street, down Narodny, to this point. The police, the authorities, had blocked every exit from this place. And when they had 15,000 people stopped, they then attacked. And that happened right where I'm standing. That was the 17th of November 1989, and that was the beginning. And to be continued. I'm going to do the States Theatre now. So, that was on the evening of the 17th of November, a massive crackdown where the police essentially blocked every exit and then attacked, news of which spread like wildfire. One man went down. His name was Ludvík Sivčák, and he actually happened to be a secret police agent. He didn't get hurt. He wasn't pretending. He just fainted, but he was picked up and put into the back of a police cruiser. Now, somebody that day, her name, I think it was like Diamond Dvorak, it was DD something. She started a rumor and said that a fictional student had been killed during that crackdown, which was untrue. But the rumor caught up with a member of Charter 77, who was Václav Havel's group of dissidents. And it wasn't broadcast because, of course, the authorities owned the airwaves, but the rumour spread very, very quickly, having been given essentially a rubber stamp by Charter 77. So with my beloved Estates Theatre behind me, so as I say, the 18th of November, news was catching on very fast. Students declared a strike, actors declared a strike, and the theatres were designated to be used for people to come and speak, to spread the word, to drum up support, because it was gaining so much momentum at the time. And of course the authorities were working both behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, if you'll pardon the theatrical pun, to quench this, to quell this as much as possible. The Prime Minister was visited, and he advised that he couldn't resign because the protests weren't big enough. And he suggested that the recent protests in Berlin, read the Berlin Wall and all of that, of some 250,000 people, is the kind of numbers that he'd need to be able to do something that big. You have to think, though, that the entire population of Prague at the time was about that many people. But that's where it was. That's where it ended up on the 18th. Right, Old Town Square. Always worth it. Okay. 19th of November 1989. In Slovakia, 500 teachers, scientists, actors, professionals, one might say, in addition to the students, declared a strike. They banded together and formed a movement called the Public Against Violence. No violence was the key to this whole thing. And so that happened in the morning. Two guys, Jan Budaj and Milan Kolashko, were the founding members, and it went from there. Meanwhile in Prague, so if you like, forming a mirror, an opposite number between the two nations within one nation, Václav Havel and the dissident members of Charter 77 formed the Civic Forum, which was, it's the same thing. Their key things were banding together, demonstrating peacefully, no violence at all. Yeah. Anyway. Right, nearly at the pub now. So, in Slovakia, in Bratislava, we had the Public Against Violence. In Prague, we had the Civic Forum. They were in communication, but it was very sporadic for obvious reasons. And between them, independently but also together, they drafted their demands. The demands included dismissal of the section of the Constitution that had been in place for 41 years, declaring that the one-party system was the only way forward, so to open the way for democratic elections. The release of political prisoners. And you have to think that this had been, to increasing degrees, to exponential degrees, an oppressive totalitarian police state for 4 decades at the time. Secret police were everywhere, or at least that's what they wanted you to think. And political prisoners were taken, no trial, or at least a show trial, as still happens in some places in the world, at the drop of a hat. One of the political prisoners who was later released became the Prime Minister of Slovakia. High up guy. So the demands were laid out, ratified, agreed upon. The splinter factions who were with them that had previously disagreed, they were uniting in Prague, uniting in Slovakia, and Bratislava and Prague uniting, forming a united front against the Soviets. I'm going to the pub now. I'm going to continue with this tomorrow. I hope you're smiling. Good afternoon, friends. So I'm walking down Vaskavské náměstí, Wenceslas Square. That's the museum behind me at the top. And honestly, usually it's very pretty here, but currently it's a building site because they are renewing and replacing the tram lines all the way along Jindřiška, which is a main thoroughfare. So, to continue, we had left off and the flashpoint had happened in Narodny, and we were up to the 19th of November 1989. So, on the 20th, the students, teachers, and the entire theatre industry declared that they were going on permanent strike. That was a day when the police stopped a demonstration that was headed up to Prague Castle. They prevented the students and teachers and members of that demonstration from entering the theatre up there to prevent people gathering to sit and listen and learn and agree or disagree and to speak. But then what had really been inertia up to this point seriously gained momentum. Prague even then was a city of 1.2 million people, about 250 in the very, very centre. But people were coming in from the suburbs and the villages and really coming in, and 100,000 people were gathered in this square. It was just shoulder to shoulder, 100,000 people. In Bratislava, likewise, the demonstrations were in the tens of thousands at this point. But just Wenceslas, which is the central square. It's not really a square, it's very much a long rectangle, but that's neither here nor there. And I'm just passing, with trees obscuring the view, the Melantric balcony, which is just above Mox and Sparks over here. That balcony there, that was where Václav Havel and another Václav Mali, who coincidentally had the same name as this square, the Czech name for Wenceslas. Václav Mali was a dissident priest. He was also a key member of 77 and a very calming voice, but dozens of people on the balcony over there were speaking to the crowd, which was gaining, and the crowd dissipated and built up again just continuously over the next few days. Right, having negotiated the building site that is currently the road. So, as I said, inertia had now become momentum and it was gaining speed, it was snowballing. And on the 21st of November, fair enough, on the 21st of November, the first official meeting between the Prime Minister and the Civic Forum was held. Actually without Havel, which was a little bit weird at the time. Concessions were made, guarantees, kind of a non-violence on both sides was agreed to. But the Prime Minister did say something to the effect of his intention to protect socialism, about which no discussion is possible. So the authorities were still very much trying to keep hold of the communist rule that had held this entire nation, the two nations together, for 41 years at this point. But really they had come to the conclusion, because, 100,000 people in one square, there is no controlling that without a just mass murder. So they were beginning to understand how big this was getting, and that emboldened the protesters, emboldened the dissidents, who could see that cracks were beginning to form. So 21st, right, just had to look up a word actually, because it's quite a mouthful. People, students, teachers, actors were going out into the suburbs, and especially the factories, because of course workers, and persuading people to come in and join them in demonstrating peacefully. Meanwhile, in Bratislava, in Vítězslav Square, I'm sure I'm still mispronounced that, very similar demonstrations were taking place. I think I mentioned before, one of the kids and fountains, always fun. I think I mentioned before, one very key Slovak political prisoner, his name was Jan Charnogórski, had been held for really quite some time, and in Bratislava, the demonstrations in the square were very much political prisoner release. And 2 days later, on the 23rd, that man was released, and he later became the Prime Minister of Slovakia. I'm down at the very bottom of Vesclavské náměstí now. You can't see the whole thing, but you can see up to the museum there. It's a very, very long square. 100,000 people on and off for 6 days filling this square. Just the most massive scale. Right, just seeing which way I wanted to go there, because the thoroughfare between Vesclavské náměstí and Staroměstské náměstí, Old Town Square, is one of the bottlenecks, if you like, of Prague, but it seems to be fairly clear. Right, so at this point, the evening of the 21st, the beginning of the 22nd of November, the cardinals, so the highest member of the clergy, and therefore, by definition, all of his subordinates, had declared their support for the dissidents, for the workers. At this point, the chairman of the Communist Party in Czech Republic, Miloš Jakeš, he was beginning to feel very threatened. I mean, he went on TV, he had a massive address, he downplayed the demonstration, downplayed the dissidents' demands, really a very state TV kind of address, really. And he also summoned, he also summoned 4,000 members of the People's Militia, so a paramilitary organization strongly under the Communist Party's remit. He did, however, disband them. He didn't send them out. I think he was beginning to understand which way the wind was blowing, because at this point, the demonstrations, it wasn't just for Vesclavské náměstí, it was all over the place. But that was the big one, until a couple of days later. Now, on the 22nd and 23rd, there began to be uncensored TV coverage of all the way back to the 17th. So Narodny, the police attacking, then the next day, and especially the big gatherings where you could just see a sea of people. So that was the 22nd. The 23rd, they had invited the opposition, well, the ruling party, to speak at their demonstrations. But there was a guy, Miloslav Stefan, who was the Prague Communist Secretary, and he was just heckled the entire... No one could hear a word, because the people were drowning him out so much. That was one of the bigger demonstrations. And at that point, it was just untenable, really. 24th, my beloved estate theatre behind me. 24th of November, the entire Presidium resigned, because the key points had been met. The size of demonstrations, the obvious power behind the dissident movement, behind the people and the workers' desire to be free. It was also one of the first addresses by Václav Havel on TV, and that was really the fulcrum. That was the tipping point. At this point, 24th and 25th of November, they began. There's Letna, which is that beautiful park that I've filmed a couple of times now, walked through with Paul, is a huge space. There's a gorgeous park. There's also a plain that they use for concerts. In this case, it was for the biggest demonstration yet. Very nearly 1 million people. Very nearly 1 million people. And you have to understand, this was a long time ago now. 1989 is 35 years ago. And at that time in late November, it was freezing. Literally, sleet, snow. Everyone was wrapped up very, very warm, but everyone was there anyway. And obviously a million people all standing together keeps each other warm fairly effectively. But Letna, 800,000 people demonstration. I think the biggest demonstration in Bratislava was 100,000 people. So we are talking just a huge proportion of the population of the time, of the population of the countries at the time. And then a couple of days later, a general strike was called on the 26th, and the entire country shut down. And at that point, with the Presidium just resigned, with the support behind the scenes for the Communist Party falling away, the Soviets declared that they were leaving and immediately began to dismantle. Celebrations took place all over Czech Republic. They went up to the borders of Germany and Poland and took down the barbed wire fences between the countries. And on the 28th of November 1989, Václav Havel was sworn in as the first president of democratic Czechoslovakia. And of course it's kind of fitting that, at the very end of my considerable monologue, I'm standing in Old Town Square. I mean, more than any other, because of the history of this place, this is the center of any given celebration in the Czech Republic. And, I wasn't actually in town. I was in Italy at the time, when the amazing Czech ice hockey team won the World Championship on home ice, no less, a few months back. But I saw the videos of this square, and it was powerful, man. But yes. Anyway, I am flying back to Britain tomorrow for a month. I'm flying home tomorrow. I come back a month later to this place, and then I start all over again. So, as always, if you like what I do, how I'm doing it, and if my syntax, intonation, and accent doesn't make you want to kill me, then please do like and subscribe. Hope you're smiling.